Good morning. How are we all today? Doing well, I hope. Fantastic. Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is U-Wen, and I'm part of the teaching team here at City Life Church. And in my day job, I am a lecturer at Alpha Crucis College, which is the ACC's denominational college. So in essence, I teach the Bible every day to people who want to be there and are studying often to be pastors and things like that. So wonderful privilege to be able to do that. Some people ask me if I actually work. The answer is yes, I think I do. It feels like work, but I do enjoy what I do very, very much. Funny story, we were planning for the semester, which has just started a few weeks ago. And you know, like all good places, when you come to teach a class of some sort, you plan it beforehand, right? I mean, I hope you do. I hope most places do. And we were sitting there talking about this New Testament class that we're going to teach. And one of my colleagues says, you know what? We really want this to be special. You know, we want this to be not like all the other New Testament classes out there, you know. We want this to be a transformative, life-changing, empowering class where students go away and they're transformed by what they learn. And I had to stop there and I said, okay, guys, let's just pause for a sec. Because if you're not teaching the New Testament in a way that is transformative, what the heck are you doing? Why are you here? I mean, think about it. You know, this is a book that has altered the course of history, the course of human history, the way people live their lives for generations and generations. And if it's not transformative in the way that we teach it, then I dare to suggest that we're not teaching it the right way. And it was just funny, you know, I don't want to bag out any of my colleagues or anything like that, but it's just interesting that we can kind of fall into that trap, can't we, of just taking it for granted and, oh yeah, it's the New Testament, oh, it's the Bible. You know, here at church, someone's going to talk for a few minutes and that's it. So let's not take it for granted. Let's understand that this is a powerful, radical text that does alter lives. And having said that, it's been really exciting to be able to come along and hear different sermons about the Sermon on the Mount. Who's enjoying the series so far? Yeah, it's been really, really cool. We've had Tina, and then we had Andrew, and then I think we've had Shelley, and now you get to hear me. We'll see if there's woos at the end of this. One thing I want to quickly say before we go on is, obviously we're not going to be able to cover the whole Sermon on the Mount, right? That's a lot. So with what we've been teaching you, with the tools that you've learned out of this, I hope that you actually go away and spend the time looking at the sermon for yourself. Read all the different things that Jesus has to say, because these are all challenging. They're all provocative. They're all life-changing. And hopefully what we are doing here is just providing you some frameworks that will help you to do that with a bit more clarity. So what I'd like to do now is quickly pray, and then we'll get started. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity that we have to be able to come, to open your word and to explore it. And as we do so, we ask that your Spirit would be ever present here amongst us. Breathe on us, Lord. Let this human figure at the front decrease, and let your Spirit be magnified. And as we dwell on your word and delve into it, we take a moment and we remember our brothers and sisters around the world who don't have the same opportunity to worship freely as we do. We hold them in our prayers. Be with them as you are with us. Help them to know that you strengthen them, you encourage them, and you walk with them. And may our prayers join theirs in uniting across the world in one kingdom, your kingdom. And may this kingdom come sooner rather than later. In your name, amen. Amen. So one thing that was very interesting last week when Shelley was speaking was she mentioned that an important thing to remember about the Sermon on the Mount is that it's not really meant to be this high-minded ideal that sets an impossible standard that no one can achieve. Because otherwise, what happens, right? You know, the suggestion she said was, you know, some people see it as this almost idol of perfection, the Sermon on the Mount, and it presents us with the paragon, if you like, of human condition that no one can actually live up to. And what happens when we do that? Well, it becomes really discouraging. We have this faith then where we're kind of lashing ourselves on the back all the time, being like, oh, it's so hard to live up to Jesus' teachings. Oh, woe is me. You know, I am just a flawed, frail, awful human being, and life is bad. And you know, sometimes it is okay, you know, and there are theological ideas that suggest that. But we shouldn't be dwelling on that all the time, and I don't think that's very helpful. So what we've been doing instead over this series is approaching it with a slightly different perspective, what we call a triadic, a three-part structure. Now, I'll talk about that in a second, but first of all, I want to introduce this guy called Glenn Stassen. Now, Glenn Stassen, you might have heard the name across our series, was a professor at Fuller Theological Seminary, which is one of the big evangelical seminaries in the US. And he actually introduced this three-part idea of reading the Sermon on the Mount that helps us to move beyond this sort of woe is me reading of it. But he has this to say. He says, the more we emphasize these teachings as ideals to live up to, the guiltier and less worthy we feel. Some of us even avoid Jesus' teachings, or if we think we do live up to these ideals, we become self-righteous. And I'm sure many of us know people like that. No one here, of course, but I know people who have gone, look, I really like what Jesus has to say, but it's impossible. No one can live up to that, so why bother trying? Why bother with this whole idea of Christianity? It's impossible. No one can do that. And on the other hand, again, I know people, no one here, who are like, well, look at me, I'm holy and perfect. Oh, no specks or planks in my eye, thank you very much. And neither of these approaches is really helpful. So what we have instead is this triadic structure. And Stassen suggests that the way we should look at the Sermon on the Mount is to pull out different stories, or different speakings, and divide them into three parts. So what Jesus is doing is, firstly, he makes an observation about the way things are, about a current practice, about the way people acted in that time. Then he makes an observation about how this traps people in a vicious cycle. So it's not a condemnation per se. It's, no, because we keep doing this, we're trapped in a system. And then what he does is he offers a transforming initiative that helps to break out of this cycle, out of this vicious cycle. So let me give you an example, a very simple one to help understand this three-part formula. Recently, I've had some severe pains in my gluteal area. That is to say, my bottom. and I think it's because I haven't been sitting correctly and I've just been, anyway. So after a couple of months, I went to see an osteo. And yes, typical man, why would I go and see a doctor? It's fine, it'll heal itself. It did not heal itself, as I hoped it would. So I had to go and see an osteo. And the advice that she gave me was in this three-part structure. She said, now listen here. When you sit on your chair, currently, you do not sit like a normal person. You sit with like one leg up and you twist your spine. Oh. That was bad. But you do all kinds of weird things and you slouch and you know what? That's not good. Then she had the second part. If you continue to do this, guess what? Things aren't going to get better, they're going to get worse. Therefore, I say to you, the third part, just sit straight and straighten your spine like a normal person sits, and guess what? Things will eventually get better. So I've been trying to do that. I have taken her advice on board, but I am still struggling, like many of us continue to struggle to take Jesus' advice on board. So, interesting, just a little three-part way of understanding it that I think is really helpful. And that brings us to today's passage. Now, today's passage is an interesting one. It's one that is very well known, that you have probably heard preached about before, and that you probably have an opinion on. So what I want to do today is something a little bit different. So first of all, we'll read the text. I'd like to separate it out into this three-part structure. And then I want to talk a little bit about how we understand the text today. Because it's a very interesting, there's an interesting contention in the way we read it. But then what I want to do is look at its context in a bit more detail, understanding exactly what Jesus means when he offers us a transforming initiative in this text. And then finally, we'll talk about what that means for us today. Sounds good? Yep, hopefully that's clear. Let's move to the text, which is Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 to 42. Matthew 5, 38, 42. And it goes as follows. You have heard the law that says, the punishment must match the injury. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist or oppose an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If a soldier if you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat also. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it for 2 miles. Give to those who ask and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. Now, first thing is, you'll notice that I put in a little bracket there that I think the word resist, possibly a better translation for it is the word oppose. Now, much of a muchness really, but you'll understand as we move a little bit further. But just a reminder that, like with any translation, there is a fair degree of nuance, and things can get lost in translation and things can be a little bit awkward sometimes. Anyone ever seen one of our guest speakers whose primary language is not English come up and they say like 2 sentences and then the translator like talks for 5 minutes and tells a joke and you're like, I don't think that matches up. So something got lost in translation there, right? It's more or less the same when it comes to the Greek language, unless you're a real expert in it. There are little things like that you can kind of give and take. N.T. Wright, Tom Wright says, actually when he translates it, but I say to you, don't use violence to resist evil. And that will become apparent as we go through this. So let's have a look at this 3-part structure of this very, very famous text. We have the first observation. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This is what's currently going on. But then we have the part that traps us in the vicious cycle. Do not resist, do not oppose an evil person. What's the transforming initiative? Well, turn the other cheek. So many of us here will have heard this saying, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And you may have heard the accompanying saying, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. Very nice saying, very pithy, very 21st century high horse morality saying. But actually, let's pause and think about this saying, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Because contextually, this in and of itself is a powerful life-giving law. You see, at the time that this law was written, back in the early days of Israel, we actually do have archaeological evidence of other laws from other nations around the same time. One example is what we call the Law of Hammurabi, which was a king of a neighboring nation. And unlike an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, Hammurabi's law code actually says something more like this. If a slave gouges out your eye, you may put them to death. If a peasant gouges out your eye, then you may seize their property. If a rich person, if a wealthy person, and I think it specifies like a judge or a priest or something, gouges out your eye, then they must repay you a certain amount. So what you had back then were actually a set of laws that helped the rich to stay rich and the powerful to stay powerful. It was not a law that reckoned all humans as being equal. In fact, it separated people by social class and caused them to have to repay even larger amounts if they were in lower classes. This is not a life-giving law. So in contrast, when we come to the law of the Lord in the Torah, we find an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This is what we call the lex talionis in Latin, which means the law of limited retribution. The amount that you can demand back from someone is limited. And this is very, very powerful because suddenly, if you're a rich person and your eye is gouged out by a slave, things happen, accidents happen. All of a sudden, you're not going, all right, I'm going to kill that slave and his family and everything he owns and take it. You can't do that. You're limited to gouging out his eye, and in respect, and what that means is this slave is now accorded human dignity. They're treated as an equal rather than as an object or as a person or a being. And it also means that you can't abuse the law to take even more than what you deserve. So in and of itself, this law was already quite revolutionary. Fast forward a few hundred years, and by Jesus' time, unfortunately, what was happening was this law was being abused. It was being used to exact as much as you could get out of someone, right? So, this person harmed me, well, I'm going to do exactly the same amount back to them. And that's not a helpful way to live. And Jesus identifies that, and he says, you know what? All this does is it locks us in a system of one person gets hurt, you hurt the other person back, and it locks us in this vicious cycle. So instead, what you've got to do is turn the other cheek. Now, the problem then is this question of turning the other cheek. Because we have often interpreted this in two sort of ways, right? One is what we call the theology of the Christian doormat, right? Where you lie down and you let people walk all over you. I mean, you've heard it said if you're in a tough situation or something bad happens to you, well, just turn the other cheek. Oh, someone's abusing you, just turn the other cheek. Kill them with kindness, you've heard it said. And, in some situations that works and that's fine. But in other situations, it's really not fine, is it? If you're in a system of abuse where you're being degraded, things like that, this can cause extreme harm. And this teaching, unfortunately, has been used to justify things like slavery, things like, staying in abusive relationships, staying in abusive religious contexts, so on and so forth. So very, very challenging. But what's the other side of it? Well, the other side of it is what we call extreme pacifism. Now, a pacifist is someone who refuses to use violence at any cost, right? And you've got different levels of that, of course. The most extreme pacifists are those, real hippie types who will not even hit a mosquito that's biting them. They're like, no, I forswear all violence, right? And the problem with that is that when you look at our 21st century world, it just isn't feasible or practical. It just doesn't work. I mean, I was thinking about this, right? I was thinking about when I was growing up, or even now. Think of the superheroes, the idols, the people we put up as good paragons of moral virtue for our children to look at, right? And I thought, is there a single one that is a non-violent pacifist, that is able to solve their problems without punching them in the face? And I couldn't come up with one. I mean, think about it. You've got things like that. I mean, the biggest movie in the world at the moment is The Avengers, right? Even the name is violent. They avenge. And you know what? How do they avenge? By punching their problems in the face. And you know what? When that doesn't work, we'll go back in time and punch our problems in the face. Spoiler alert. Sorry for those who haven't seen that movie. And that's a real problem. And I thought about it, and I went back and I thought, well, let me get on my righteous high horse. I'm sure that growing up there was someone who was like that, but I couldn't think of anyone. In fact, growing up, I wanted to be Jackie Chan or Jet Li, right? Every young Asian boy growing up wants to be either Jackie Chan or Jet Li. Chris is nodding. Chris knows what it's like. I mean, Chris could probably pull off Jackie Chan pretty well. But let's be honest. The real Chinese idol is Bruce the Dragon Lee. Yeah? Come on. All the Asian men are like, yes! He is a representative of who we are. This is what it's all about. But Bruce the Dragon Lee himself is a martial artist. So this whole idea of non-violence and pacifism, it's just not really tenable or workable in the world that we live in. So what happens? Well, we just ignore it. We kind of just go, oh yeah, Jesus says to turn the other cheek, but dear God, please never let me be in a situation where I have to use violence because then I don't know what I'm going to do. And most of us fall into that, right? And thank God most of us will never be in one of those situations. But what happens if we are? How do we do this? How do we interpret this text? Well, what I want to suggest today is a third way, a slightly different contextual understanding of Jesus' transforming initiative that gives us a different perspective on what's actually going on. So I'm going to get Chris Young to come up with my bag and give me a hand demonstrating this. One quick note was that the early Christians, before the Roman Empire became a Christian empire, they actually took this command so seriously that most of them would refuse to join the military. They were conscientious objectors. Those of you who lived during the Vietnam era would be aware of people like this because they genuinely believed that Jesus' call to pacifism was one that they had to take seriously. And so they were often executed for refusing to join the military. So a very, very tough teaching there. So let's explore this text in context. Jesus says, when someone strikes you on the cheek, turn the other cheek, right? Wrong. Jesus says, when someone strikes you on the right cheek. So everyone point at your right cheek on your face. Yep, good. Okay, what I'm going to do now is get Chris to strike me on my right cheek. Yes, thank you. Take your ring off. That's very helpful. Once more, no. I was like, once more for effect? No, let's not do that for effect. What hand did he strike me with? His left hand, right? Because he had to take his wedding ring off. Now, pause for a sec. Anyone here lived in the Middle East before or been there? Or certain Asian countries? What's the problem with slapping someone with the left hand? You can't do it. There is a taboo around touching people with your left hand. And that taboo has been there for time immemorial, even during the time of Jesus. So, Chris, you can't use your left hand to slap me on my right cheek. So please now slap me on my right cheek. Yeah, okay, maybe not that way. Come on, you're not going to walk up to someone and be like, hey, slap me on the right cheek properly. Thank you. One more time for effect. Oof, that was a bit hard. Like that, right? What do we call this? A backhand. What kind of person gets hit with a backhand? This is possibly one of the most degrading, humiliating strikes you can inflict on someone. And back in Jesus' day, most likely it was the slaves who received backhands because they weren't treated as fully human. Right? I mean, even nowadays, I wouldn't even consider hitting someone with a backhand. And I hope, no one here would. But what happens then if you're a slave owner and I'm the slave and you backhand me because you're, annoyed or had a bad day or whatever, and I suddenly say, hit me on this side. Thank you, you did have to demonstrate that. But, but what am I doing as the slave? All of a sudden, I'm not being a Christian doormat, am I? I'm saying, I dare you to strike me as an equal. I challenge you not to dismiss me with a slap that refuses to acknowledge my humanity, but I challenge you to strike me on this side, the same way you would strike any equal of yours. All of a sudden, you are demanding your humanity and dignity back from a situation that is robbing it from you. Interesting. And probably quite challenging for many of the slaves and the slave owners there. I wonder what that's like for us today. But let's move on. The next one says, when someone sues you and takes your shirt, give them your cloak also. Now, what's that all about? In order to understand this better, we need to quickly go to Deuteronomy chapter 24, everyone's favorite book, Deuteronomy. And it says, if your neighbor is poor and gives you his cloak as security for a loan, do not keep the cloak overnight. Return the cloak to its owner by sunset, so that he or she can stay warm through the night and bless you, and the Lord your God will count you as righteous. So, in that time, every person had a big overcoaty type thing, right? Imagine a poncho crossed with a sleeping bag. And by the time of Jesus, they'd worked it out with this law, that you could sue someone for everything up to and including the shirt off their back, but because of this law, you had to leave them the cloak, this coat that would keep them warm at night, but would keep them from being naked. So let's flip it, all right? Let's replace coat with shirt and shirt with coat. So Chris sues me for all that I have, and I give him my cloak. He's taken everything from me. I just now have the shirt on my back, right? So what happens? We're going to start stripping off. Hey, guess what? You want everything? Here, take everything. and all of a sudden, I am naked because I've stripped off and I've thrown my everything at Chris. Now, in Jewish philosophy, Jewish custom, and Jewish thought, nakedness is a problem. Think about what happens with Noah. He passes out drunk in a tent, and a couple of his sons cover him up. But the son that sees him naked is the one that is, well, not condemned is a bit of a strong word, but he is the one who is unrighteous because he has seen his father's nakedness, right? It's not Noah's fault, it's the son's fault because, he didn't avert his eyes. So if I suddenly strip naked in front of Chris, who is the unrighteous one in this situation? It's Chris, because he has caused me to be naked, and he's viewed it. So this is interesting. Who sues someone for absolutely everything up to and including the shirt off their back? Someone who really wants to take advantage of the law. Someone who wants to prosecute someone so far that they probably don't even acknowledge them as being a person anymore. someone who wants to abuse the law to get everything they can. So what is Jesus saying in this situation? Challenge that. Flip the situation on its head and say, you know what? You want to take everything I have? That's fine. But let me turn it on its head and remind you that I am a human and that your actions have repercussions. Now you are the condemned one. Interesting. The third one, Jesus says, if a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, take it a second mile. Now, in the Roman Empire, there was a little law that allowed soldiers to force everyday people to carry their packs for a mile. Only 1 mile. And in fact, we see this in the Gospels. One day, there's a bloke called Simon of Cyrene in the Gospel of John. He's minding his own business, and then a soldier comes and grabs him, and he's like, hey, there's this Jesus bloke can't carry his cross anymore. Guess what? You get to do it for a mile. So Simon of Cyrene is coerced, shall we say, into carrying Jesus' cross. So we see an example of that in action. So Chris, you're a Roman soldier. You've got a pack. And Chris is a Roman soldier. He's walking along one day, and he sees me, a Jewish peasant, toiling in the field, and he thinks, ha-ha, I'm going to use the law here. And he forces me to take his pack. Now, in the ancient world, the Romans set up a series of milestones throughout the roads so that you could know how far you walked, right? So a picture of that will come up in just a second. So we walk along, and we hit, where are we going? Centurion doesn't know where he's going. So we come along to the first milestone, and you say, stop, we've hit the milestone. And I say, well, where are you going? And okay, let's say Capernaum or Antioch. All right, well, I'm going to keep going. Oh, it's all right, I'll take it a second mile. How are you feeling, Chris? Yeah. Good? You feeling good about making me carry your pack? Hey, you know, what happens if your commander finds out that you forced someone to carry their pack and they went 2 miles? Does that mean you'll get in trouble? In fact, I wonder what happens if the governor finds out. He might have you executed. Hey, that's pretty bad. Gee, it's unfortunate, isn't it, that someone's carrying the pack for 2 miles? So what you have here is another reversal of a situation that dehumanizes and oppresses people. Thank you, Chris. You can grab a seat. Thank you, Chris. Give him a hand. All of a sudden, the Roman soldier has gone from a position of dominance, superiority, just by virtue of being a Roman soldier, to a position where he's begging, please don't go any further. Give me my pack back. Otherwise, I'll get in trouble. How ridiculous. But what a powerful reversal. Imagine what it would have been like to be on either side of that exchange. Bringing it all together, what do we have? Well, we have here a teaching that can set the world on fire, quite literally. Because Jesus calls us not to passively accept when things happen, but to stand up and challenge injustice, challenge practices that dehumanize, challenge things that cause us to treat people as others, right? Jesus reminds us that at the end of the day, every interaction is between one person to another person. And that's what God's kingdom is all about. A place where men and women are all treated equally. That's what God is interested in. So I'll get the band to come up. Walter Wink, who is a theologian who first sort of popularized this idea, he says this. He says, the words and deeds of Jesus reveal that he's not just some minor reformer. He is an egalitarian prophet. He is a prophet that cares about all people equally, who challenged, who repudiated, who refused to believe in the very premises of the domination system, the right of some people to lord it over others by means of power, wealth, shaming, or titles. Elsewhere, he says, the person who turns the other cheek is in effect saying, try again. Your first blow failed to humiliate me because I deny you that power. I am a human being just like you. Your status does not alter that. You cannot demean me. What does that mean for us today? It's challenging because rather than being Christian doormats, we're called to look out for places where this injustice is happening, where we see people as being treated less than human, or in situations where we ourselves are being crushed, oppressed, dominated. This gives us permission to speak up and to speak out against that, to challenge that, to say to our oppressors, no, we too are human. We too should be seen as equal because that's what God believes in. It's challenging because there's so many systems all around us that do this. And we have a massive fight on our hands. How do we fight against injustice everywhere, all the time? Well, let me suggest that every small step counts. Every time one person stands up and says something or does something, that changes something. It brings God into that situation more powerfully than ever before. And it shows people, hey, Christians are willing to stand up for what is right. Maybe we should too. And it's not about just words and platitudes and sort of, token symbolism. This is Jesus calling us to really, really take action in all kinds of situations. Whether it's in our workplaces, in our relationships, in other countries where young women are being abused and trapped, we are called to make a difference. This isn't a free pass, by the way. You don't get to go, oh, I work from 9 to 5, from Monday to Friday. I am being oppressed by the man. Okay, that's not oppression. We're talking about serious, genuine times where people are being taken advantage of, being abused. But we need to do something. We need to say something. And we need to invite God, the Holy Spirit, to speak through us, to be in those situations so that we can help liberate the captives, help bring people out of oppression. We can be salt and light, a city on a hill, because that's what we are called to do. As the great Bruce Lee says, be like water making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you will find a way around or through it. Or as Jesus would say, do not repay violence with violence, but turn the other cheek, go the extra mile. Do it all with a smile. Challenge the systems, but remain good Christians in amongst that, because that's what kingdom is all about. Now, I realize this has been a very, very challenging teaching. And so what I encourage you to do is to take some time and think about it, argue about it, discuss it in your life groups, think about this. But what I hope this calls us to do more than anything else is to stand up and make a difference. Think about the world that we live in. Think about where our clothes come from, our food comes from. The Amazon is on fire. There are people in Hong Kong standing up for what's right, many of them Christians, using non-violent techniques. What are we doing to change the world around us?